some of my college days, which wasn't that long ago.
Yes, it was.
Maybe 2 decades. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. If I get a thumbs up from Kyoki that it's all good to go. Okay. All righty then. Obviously, I'm not Brian Turner. I'll get him. Obviously, I'm not Brian Turner. Yeah, I've actually got some hair still. But he had to be out of town, so he asked me to, he asked me and Dennis if we'd pick up the 2 Sundays he's going to be gone, and Dennis is going to be gone today, so by the casting of lots or whatever, I was selected for the class. I'll try not to be too terribly boring and too apparently unprepared, because I decided to do something a little different than I normally do. Probably the same delivery style, but something a little different. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this passage up here, be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. Does anybody know where that comes from? I'll even settle for just the book. Hint, it's in the New Testament. Starts with a J. James, very good. Yeah, there's so many places where phrases are similar in wording and meaning, but James really puts it succinctly. And that's what we're actually going to look at, is the book of James. Now, when I was taking some of my college classes, when I started out with the religious studies, which unfortunately I had to change gears because I needed a paying job at the time, one that paid for the temporal side of things like rent and stuff. But we had to do this exercise, and the professor said, I want you to take a book out of the Bible and I want you to outline it. And we all kind of went, huh? Well, James wasn't the one I picked. I think I did the book of John, which, boy, maybe I should have went with James or even Jude or something like that. But I was going through some stuff online, and I found a series of biblical outlines, and I started going through some of them, and James caught my eye because this was the key passage from the book of James. And so what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the outline of the book of James. A little focus here and there on some of the specifics. But before we do that, this is a way of introduction. The James, there's 4 possibilities. Well, actually, there's not 4 possibilities, only probably really 2 or 3 possibilities of which James wrote this. And I think most of us know. But in the New Testament, there are 4 men who bear the name James. We got James, the son of Zebedee, who was the brother of John. He was the fisherman that was one of the 2 sons of thunder. According to some of more tradition and historical record, I think, we do have the biblical account, of course. He was killed by Herod by the sword, and they believe the year was like 44 A.D. The next James is a fellow, we find him in Matthew 10:3 and Acts 1:13, if you want to know where he is. He's James, the son of Alphaeus. Very little's known about him. He may be James the younger. His mother Mary was among the women at Jesus' crucifixion in the tomb, according to Matthew 27:59. And also Mark 15:45, 16:1, and Luke 24:9. Based on some other, like, how do I want to put this? Based on John 19:25 and Matthew 10:2, excuse me, this Alphaeus may be, I don't want to call it a pseudonym, I can't think of the word, but a dialectic version of Cleophas. Only because of the way it describes who was at the, looking on, of the women that were looking on the Cleophas, and in another spot where it lists the brothers of this particular James, and so on. I could probably do 20 minutes just on that alone. I'm not going to. But it's possibly that Cleophas and Alphaeus were the same person. Unfortunately, so many of these names were very common at the time. Mary, James, Joseph, Judas, so it can get real confusing. Then there's another James who's called the brother of Judas the Apostle. Now, what I found interesting in going back to what you were talking about, different versions and stuff, in the King James Version, the Inspired Version, and the New Revised Standard Version, it says this was James, the brother of Judas the Apostle, in all those cases. In the New King James Version, it says he was the father of Judas the Apostle. So there's a disconnect there somewhere. And then the final one, of course, is James, the brother of our Lord. He was a half-brother of Jesus. He gained a lot of prominence in the church at Jerusalem. We see examples of that in Galatians 2:9. He also played an important role in the conference at Jerusalem in Acts 15:13 through 33. That's where they were having the discussion about how the ministry was going to go to the Gentiles and what the requirements were going to be for them. Did they have to be circumcised? Did they have to follow the dietary laws and so on? And James, the Lord's brother, this last James is most likely the author of the Epistle of James for a couple of reasons. Traditionally, James is viewed as a man of prayer. In fact, there's a saying that he was on his knees praying so much that they were thick like a camel's. So he was a man of prayer. The emphasis of the book of James is on prayer, a prayerful life. And he was apparently either cast down from the temple or beaten to death with clubs somewhere around 62 AD, just to kind of put things in perspective. He wrote this, the intended recipients of James was the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. These are the ones that were carried away into Assyria and Babylon and are still out there in the world somewhere and weren't among the ones that came back to Jerusalem to rebuild it. But even though they're called Jews, James makes it very clear that it was addressed specifically to Christian Jews, or Jewish Christians, I guess would be the way to put it, because he says they are brethren in the Lord. It's not addressed to a specific church, so it's a general epistle, just like 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st John, and the book of Jude. They're all general epistles. They're not written to the Corinth church or the Ephesus church or whatever. But here we come to the important part. Does anybody know what the book of James focuses on? It focuses on the Christian life. The entire book focuses on it. In fact, that's where this particular verse comes from. James 1:21. Now, if this was Mark's, or 1:22, excuse me. If this was Mark's KBM talk or something like that, he'd say, this is your memory verse. Bring it back next week and get a prize or something. As Brian says, you can have an extra dessert on potluck or whatever. But the book breaks out. The first thing it talks about, I think probably the best way to do this is if somebody could read James 1, verses 2 through 4. Amy?
My brethren, count it all joy.
They may not have gotten it turned on.
My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into many afflictions, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing.
All right. So the Christian life endures trials and temptations. with two elements. Anybody catch what those were? Primarily, it's joy and patience, but in those verses. That's the first thing he points out. We endure trials. We endure the temptations with joy and patience. Now, how many of us have said something along the lines of, Lord, give me patience and I want it now, or something along those lines? We get impatient for his answers, don't we? We get impatient for him to get us out of the struggle we're going through. And that's understandable. And sometimes we think, oh, well, while I'm waiting, I'll do this or that or the other thing. And that comes to the second part of the outline of the book. And it says that we endure the trials and temptations with wisdom from God. That's verses 5 through 8 talk about that. And I think hand in hand with that is a proper perspective. Now, what in the world would be the proper, or should I say, what in heaven would be the proper perspective? What does that mean? The verse reads, let me read the verses first real quick. I'll be nice there. Verse 9 through 11 says, going back a little bit, we remember John 1:5 is the one about seeking wisdom. And it says, for let not a man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. That's something that he really reemphasizes, is that comparison between a fleshly man and the spiritual man. But going on to that perspective, let the brother of low degree rejoice in that he is exalted, but the rich in that he is made low, because as the flower of the grass he shall pass away. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his ways. So how does that relate to perspective? Thoughts? Brian?
Doesn't matter if we're rich or poor, in perspective to God, we're nothing in comparison to Him. And Book of Mormon talks about that. We are even lower than the dust, because even the dust is obedient to God and we aren't. So that kind of puts it into perspective for us.
Yep.
And helps us to put God where He should be and where we should be also.
Exactly. That whole perspective is what is important, what is valuable. And wealth fadeth away. Sort of like a class I taught Wednesday night. It was, store up your treasures in heaven. So, yeah, we want to be looking at all this from the perspective of God, the perspective of eternity, our entire life. And do we understand temptation? That's the next thing. We approach the trials and temptations with an understanding of temptation. Verses 12 through 15 in chapter 1 talk about that. But I'll come back to that in a bit. Alrighty. And then here's the one I think we really sometimes struggle with, is we approach these trials and such with an awareness of the Father's goodness. And then we get into the second part of this whole epistle. Well, not really the second chapter, but this goes from the last part of 1 into 2. Christian life consists of doing, not just hearing. We should be swift to hear, but not hearers only, but doers. We shouldn't be showing any favoritism, personal favoritism. And how does one show their faith? Anybody got that? You'll find it down in chapter 2, beginning about verse 14. How do we show our faith? If somebody could read 2:14 through 25. Terry?
14 through 25?
2:14 through 25.
Hey, what profit is it, my brethren, for a man to say he hath faith and hath not works? Can faith save him? Yea, a man may say, I will show thee I have faith without works. But I say, show me thy faith without works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. For if a brother or a sister be naked and destitute, and one of you say, depart in peace, be warned and filled, notwithstanding he gave not those things which are needful to the body, what profit is your faith unto such? Even so faith, if it have not works, is dead, being alone. Therefore wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead, and cannot save you.
I'm going to stop you right there. Give you a breather. Where'd it go? Verse 17, even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead. Send me, Mylan.
You got to go back even to 11.
Okay?
We're getting way ahead of the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Because it says, we're talking about the Ten Commandments and what they said, and he says right here, but do not commit adultery. And he also said, do not kill. Now, if you would commit no adultery, but you go out here and kill, but the word kill doesn't mean physically taking somebody's life. It means spiritually taking their life too. And you telling them what to do and you go out and do something else. Totally opposite of it. It's not even in the word, it's in the spirit.
Exactly. Well, what's the passage that says that about, I think it's right there, that I say unto you, even one who looks and lusteth after another has already committed adultery in their heart. So sin comes from here. So does obedience and service to God. Brian?
I want to go one more back, Mylan. For whosoever shall save in one point keep the whole law, he shall be guilty of all. So pretty much right there, it calls us all out to account that none of us were guilty of the whole law. Because it says right there, if you shall keep the whole law, he is guilty of all. Unless
Right.
save 1 point, just
Yep.
1 point, then you're guilty of the whole law. So it kind of puts us into perspective how much we need Jesus Christ.
Exactly, because we can't do it without him. And think about that. You know, we have the Ten Commandments, and we have the law that Jesus gave us, the two great commandments. To love the Lord thy God, and to love your neighbor as yourself kind of thing. He's told us do good and all. If we fall short on either one of those two overarching ones, which encompasses the entire Ten Commandments, even if it's something simple as holding a grudge at someone, is that getting away with our relationship to God? Does that keep us out of his presence? Sure does. Because we're also told scripturally that God cannot bear the smallest point of sin, the smallest amount of sin. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But those are absolutely right. But do we think about those things as we go through our life day to day? When we consider our Christian walk, when we consider the choices we're making, do we stop and think about these kind of things? Am I what I'm about to do? Is that in accordance with commandments of the Lord? Or do we just do it and then afterwards say, oops, which we're prone to do. And then, well, that reminds me of kind of a story. With communion, since today's Communion Sunday. I grew up next door to a lady, another denomination. Of course, I wasn't even a member of this church at that point in time. That she was quite the character on the weekend, Friday night, Saturday night. She's an older lady. Well, to me then, anybody growing up was older. But my sister and I were talking with her one day, and we now understand that she was hungover. And we said, well, why do you keep going and doing that? I mean, you go to church every Sunday and stuff, and you know, and Jesus says not to do those kind of things. And she goes, oh, that's okay. I go to confession Sunday morning, and I take the emblems, and it's all forgotten. And I just can do whatever until next week. I think she's missing something there, don't you? And I'm so appreciative of the number of times the scriptures tell us not to partake unworthily. And that just goes back to what Mylon and Brian were saying. It's that perspective. Is that it, Brian?
Also, you talking about faith, by partaking of the emblems, it is part of exercising our faith in the things that we've been told to do. It's part of being obedient unto the teachings of Jesus Christ. So hopefully we do it worthily, and we strive to follow his teachings, and that's our whole goal, is to follow him. Mm-hmm. And that faith that we put in him and the things he told us to do, we strive to follow and implement them in our lives, and that is faith by works. And it's not dead to us.
Right. And I hope it didn't sound like I was downplaying our sacrament, but that is one of the blessings that we have, and I don't know that we realize what a blessing that really is, because so many people go through their lives. There's those out there that think once saved, always saved, but they're missing out on something. There's a depth to their conviction and their commitment and their relationship that's missing. Where's that opportunity to consistently and regularly seek his face and ask his forgiveness and ask for his guidance to do better, to be washed and strengthened through the body and the blood of Christ? You know, in truth, that focus that we have on the communion emblems and what they are and what that's all about, and the worthiness and the remembrance of our baptism, isn't emphasized in a lot of places. It really isn't, Terry. And then Bruce.
Another point here. This is from Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17. And it says, wherefore in all things behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. The key word there is reconciliation. And it's not just with God, but with others. That didn't throw you off, did it?
No.
Okay.
Bruce?
In the book of Revelation, the blessings are given to the overcomers.
Exactly. And who is an overcomer? One that sets their sins aside or recognizes in humility where they stand. And that's another point that we have, is that concept of reconciliation. To be reconciled to God. And again, our communion is one of the elements for that process. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
So you use that point of people say once saved, always saved. With that in mind, how do they go on to, like it says in verse 4, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfected and entirely wanting nothing. The trying of your faith worketh patience. So if you just say, I'm saved no matter what, and your faith has no works, how do you go on to perfection like we're called to be and make that effort in our lives to continue to sanctify our lives in and through our works and our faith? If we just say, I'm saved, then you have no direction to continue to strive to be better or to serve better.
It's like saying, from what? I'm saved, from what?
Mm-hmm.
Paul said it's better not to know Jesus than to know Jesus and then leave him.
So that brings me kind of to another question. We're talking about faith with the works being the evidence of the faith, I guess is a good way to put it. Does that kind of make faith just maybe a little bit more significant in our relationship than belief? Or a lot more? Can we believe and not have faith? Can we have faith and not believe? And there are those that teach, all you need to do is believe in Jesus. That kind of fits in with that once saved, always saved thing, because in verse 19 of this chapter, thou believest there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. Thou hast made thyself like unto them, not being justified. That's a pretty hefty statement, isn't it? What does it mean not to be justified?
To be justified means to be declared innocent.
Exactly. It takes that faith and obedience element to be justified, doesn't it? Probably even, and in that, there's a balance. The faith and the obedience. I don't know if it's a balance or if it's like a merging. The two are intermixed and strengthen each other. The more faith we have, the more obedient we are. The more obedient we are, the more faith we have. It's kind of people say it's a big circle. I think it's more like a big spiral. It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. Brian?
So that's a really big verse, and you could probably do a whole sermon on it alone.
Mm-hmm.
He pretty much says, you believe in God, well, so do the devils, and they tremble. And you made yourself like unto them. So he's comparing the people who say they believe to devils. Basically, if you stop right there, you're no better than them. Because why? Because the devils were rebellious and continue to walk in their rebellion. With faith, we deny ourselves of those things and go in a different direction than the devils.
Absolutely.
So if you don't have faith, then you're
Yep.
you're about the same as them.
Yep. Boy, I tell you what, that really says a lot to our lives as well. As you can see, again, just another point that shows how James illustrates what the Christian life is supposed to be like by throwing the contrast out there of what it's like not to be a follower of Christ. Being an enemy to God is the phrase that he uses. So, go ahead.
Having faith gives you a happier life. If you don't have faith, you're always upset. You're always making the wrong decisions. You're never happy.
Yeah, it goes right back to what we opened up with in the first chapter of James, doesn't it? We face our trials and temptations with joy and peace. We get that from having the wisdom of God and relying on his wisdom, being obedient to him. Not violating even the finest point of the law. And believe me, I don't think any of us will ever avoid violating one of those little points until the final days when we walk through those gates. But it's something to strive for. It doesn't excuse us. Something else that comes out in those first few verses of chapter 2. I'm kind of jumping back and forth a little bit here because there's some key points out of the chapter. When it talks about who is our neighbor, here he's talking a lot about the poor and the rich and the vanity. Does that mean we should like turn our backs on rich people? Should we turn our backs on the poor people? What does God want us to do? Is there anybody we exclude from our works, our testimony? Two people walk in here. One of them, just some guy off the street, scraggly dressed and everything else. And the other one's the mayor of Council Bluffs. Who do we approach first? Who do we give the better honors to and the most attention? Or it could be some celebrity. I don't know. Maybe for some of us, maybe it's the quarterback from Nebraska, Mylan. I don't know. I'm just picking on you a little bit. But who is there supposed to be any difference in our eyes? Does it matter if I've got a suit on or a t-shirt and a pair of jeans? That's something to think about. Does it matter that I have a tie or don't have a tie? Now, there's another side to that, isn't there, Mylan? We're supposed to present our best to the Lord when we come to worship Him, aren't we? So we shouldn't just be doing it because, coming in jeans or whatever, just because. But if it's the best I've got, we present a clean image. That's a requirement. We, however, no matter what we're wearing, we don't get the option to say, oh, blue jeans. We don't get the option to say, oh my gosh, look at that Christian Dior dress or whatever. It's
It's not what you have on the outside, it's what you have on the inside.
Thank you. Exactly.
But you would look nice in it.
No. I just don't have the figure for one of those Dior dresses, do I? They may be lovely and everything, but in the long run, do they really have any worth? Does the nature of our homes, does any of that should any of that make a difference to us in who we approach, who we interact with? This says no. But we are also told be careful of who we associate with, because if we are always with, drunkards or something like that, it's very easy to fall into that pattern. They call that peer pressure. But that also doesn't prevent us from, say, maybe going into a bar or something to intervene with a friend, to bring the word to someone we know that's in there and that's starting to maybe fall further into whatever. It's really a hard line. There's not a whole lot we can turn our backs on as brothers and sisters being part of the body of Christ, is there? At least not when it comes to people. Yes.
There's a parable about the wedding garments. The man who went to the wedding supper and he didn't have a wedding garment, and the bridegroom asked him why he didn't have a wedding garment, and he was chastised because he didn't have a garment on that was proper.
And when that was talking about a wedding garment, is that talking about the clothing he had on, or is that talking about the way his spirit was dressed?
I think a little bit of both.
A little bit of both. Not presenting that clean image, but also making sure that our spirit is right. Brian?
So the wedding garment, and it's in 19:8 and 9. And it was granted unto her that she should be arrayed in fine linen and white, and fine linen for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. That's the garment you get. It's the righteousness that you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, and he, through grace, will give you in the end. And that's what it's talking about. That guy didn't have the wedding garment on, which means he didn't do the things of his Lord.
Exactly. And I'll tell you what, I think linen is an excellent example for that robe, because linen is probably the most comfortable fabric you can wear. So spiritual linen, I just can imagine how nice that would be. Because it's better than silk, because it wicks moisture and stuff. I won't get into that. All right, so chapter 2 talks, chapter 1 is talking to us mostly about how we can be enemies to God, how we follow God, the basics of our Christian walk, the things, the joy, the peace, the wisdom. Chapter 2 gets into not playing favorites, having a faith coupled with belief, coupled with works. Without the faith or the belief elements, or the works element rather, we'd be hard pressed to defend the fact that we have faith. Chapter 3 gets into something else. And right off the bat, somebody read James 3, 1 and 2. This is really interesting. Yvonne? James 3, 1 and 2.
My brethren, strive not for the mastery, knowing that in so doing we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth.
Thank you. Actually, the rest of that does kind of come into play very much there. What is that saying to you? What is it saying to us? The first part there, striving for mastery. If we've mastered all this, then it's even more incumbent on us. If, like I don't know, maybe some of us are closer to mastering it than others, but it's incumbent on us to teach it to others. But if we teach someone else in error, who's the biggest condemnation on? Mylon?
Well, you were saying something about there's some of us that could be in a better position to be helping other people and that. And in James 3, where is it? 6, 7, somewhere in there. 8. The tongue can no man tame. And I don't think we can sit here and say, well, I know somebody that it could. Because this is God's word. He says, but no man can tame. And he says, it is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And then you go down to 10. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. Brethren, these things ought not to be. I think that's the thing that sticks in my heart, is that my inability to stop figuring out what everybody else should be doing, or they're doing wrong. Why aren't they involved in this and that in church? Why are they not doing this or that in anything? And I think God has to move us. And if we're not being moved, maybe we need to help them and stop picking them apart. But there is none of us that are perfect. And so I ask myself, what right do I have to go up to someone who is a obvious sinner? Obvious. Oh, they do dumb, stupid, idiotic things and sinful things. Some of them are nice people doing sinful things. I see it on my TV set every day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many commercials are lying to me. I should be an MD because of all the medicine that's in those things. I mean, there's no one that isn't better and perfect and got it all figured out. And we can sit here and say, well, they shouldn't do that. And we've got to tell them, well, are we going to start saying that's wrong? Are we going to stand up as a Church of Jesus Christ? And even though we're sinners, we have to tell them we're number one sinner of the world, but
See, and I
like
think
that commercial from that one insurance company. I should have, but.
Yep. And you've got an excellent point there, because this is telling us, I think, the tongue can do both. The tongue can do blessings. It can go up to that sinner and say, hey, I don't really know where you're coming from, but, perhaps there's a better way to find what you're seeking, without telling them they're wrong. I think they already know that. But it's also dealing with, as you said, approaching them saying, you're wrong. Maybe, depending on what they're doing. Some of it, like he said, is really obvious. But what we do with our tongue reveals who we really are. What we say, how we approach people, the way we may criticize in a negative way or criticize in a positive way. So I hand Amy.
Yeah, I don't think this is just telling us to keep silent and not say anything. But what it's asking us to do is it referenced that bit in the horse's mouth, is to submit all our thoughts and all our everything we say to what the Lord would have us to do and say. And so I know oftentimes when I've been in situations what I want, the first thing off the top of my head, I get myself into a lot more trouble than if I'm silent and I go and pray about it, or I give that pause so that I can ponder what the Lord would have me to say. The situation works out very differently and usually better by both parties. So there is a time and place where we need to stand up and we need to speak, but we also need to make sure that it's not our words from our natural carnal self and what we would have to say, but what the Lord would have us say.
Yeah, I've always envisioned that helm or that bit in the horse's mouth as being the Holy Spirit directing me. And I'm like you. I can get really passionate about something and say things that might not be the complete truth because I don't have all the facts perhaps. Sometimes it might be I'm just so upset that, well, I don't think I tell anybody that I hate them anymore. Boy, I used to do that, but so sometimes it is better just to shut up and walk away. But you're right. That's not telling us to be totally silent. That's telling us to use our tongues for good, to use our words. Words hurt a lot more than being hit with a rock or something. I used to be more afraid of my dad scolding me than whooping me, so Yvonne?
That 13 is really a good statement. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. And like Amy was saying, you know, if you see something you feel like you need to say, and it's, you know, it's not going to be maybe received the best, you know, to go and pray about it first, and the Lord will just help. I mean, maybe whatever words come out, you just pray that they'll be the blessing that they were intended to be. And you might get a response from that person that's, you know, good, but you might not, too. And then, who knows, maybe it resonates later, or by numerous people kind of saying the same thing, you know, it starts to sink in. You just don't know. But I think if God knows our intent and what is needed, then we just have to give it to Him to carry on.
And I think you're absolutely right there. And we're going to wrap up here, I think, on this. We're not going to get to 4 and 5, but I encourage you to take a look at those. But my dad used to tell me, don't do what I do what I say. I think this is a case where we need to make sure we're doing what he says. It's so easy for us to wander off, and all that separates us from God and from the Spirit. And I'm with Amy. Sometimes it's best just to shut up and go pray about a situation and then reapproach it or not approach it as God guides us. But I think talking about our words and our deeds, and what speaks the loudest, our deeds. And I think that's exactly what James was getting to. Faith without those works is dead. You can say all you want, but if people don't see it happening, they're going to have a harder time believing it. And quite often, if you're doing what he says, they'll ask you what it is you have. Not all of them. But whose job is it anyway to bring people into the kingdom and convert them and bring them into the church? Is it our job? Or is it our job just to testify of him and encourage it? And the Holy Spirit brings them in? Or is it a little bit of both? All right, that wraps us up for today.